King of the Harem Heaven, the amazing true story of a daring charlatan who ran a virgin love cult in America, by Anthony Sterling. King of the Harem Heaven was originally published in 1960 as a Monarch Americana book by Monarch Books Incorporated, Derby, Connecticut. Anthony Sterling is a pseudonym for an unknown Michigan author. Nothing in this book is intended to reflect any discredit or obloquy on the reconstructed House of David or Israelite organization, which, as far as the author and publisher know, presently fully conform to any of the moral and legal principles of the communities in which they live. Author's profile. Anthony Sterling is a pseudonym of a well-known writer and historian whose work has appeared regularly in the Saturday Evening Post, Cosmopolitan, the Virginia Quarterly Review, Argosy, and many other leading magazines, and whose books have repeatedly won critical acclaim. A lifelong Michigan resident, he has blended numerous personal sources with intensive, on-the-scenes research in producing the first full-length account of the incredible life of King Ben Purnell. Acknowledgements. This narrative is indebted to the Detroit Free Press, to the Detroit News, to the Benton Harbor News Palladium, to the Burton Historical Collection of the Detroit Public Library, to Central Records Division, County Building, Ann Arbor, Michigan, to historian Milo M. Quaife for the chapter of the King of Benton Harbor. In his text Lake, Michigan, to travel writer Webb Waldron for the chapter The House of David, in his book We Visit the Great Lakes, and to various other newspaper, magazine, text, and personal sources, no less helpful but too numerous for listing here. Although the married names of the former harem girls who returned to testify against King Ben Purnell were widely publicized both in the sensational exposés of 1923 and in the detailed coverage of the 1927 trial, no useful purpose would be served by repeating them herein, and only maiden names have been used whenever possible. King of the Harem Heaven by Anthony Sterling. Introduction. Early in 1958, the Michigan Department of Conservation announced that it was purchasing Lonely Little High Island in Upper Lake, Michigan for use as a wildlife study area, a breeding ground for grouse. If you fished those waters and gone ashore there, you'd have found the rotting ruins of a single building and traces of the foundations of several others. And the old Indians living on nearby islands would tell you that the structure still standing was the harem shack. They had other stories to tell. Amusing tales of a mysterious holy man with uncut hair and a long beard the color of flame. A holy man who once sunned himself on the high island beach while a dozen or more attractive young girls clustered about him and waited on him like servants. Grim tales of hearing the weird animal-like screams of insane men and women who were held captive on that island, who were sometimes abandoned and left to die with the winter coming on. If you'd been old enough in the 1920s to read the Detroit and Chicago newspapers, without having the latest exposé torn from their pages to shield your innocence, you knew that the Indian stories were true. For High Island, in a surprisingly recent era, was both the summer home and the prison camp of a very strange man, a man who created and reigned over an actual monarchy, a system of slavery more absolute than anything known in the Middle Ages, remaining in power for nearly a quarter of a century. Our conservation department's announcement made a lot of people remember King Ben, King of the Israelite House of David, King of the Flying Rollers, originally Benjamin Franklin Purnell. The Indian tales were in fact only one small part of the truth of the incredible saga of Ben Purnell. For High Island was but an outpost of his domain. His stronghold was several hundred miles to the south at Benton Harbor, directly across the lake from Chicago. And here it was not only rumored but charged and proven in open court, he kept his subjects living at the lowest level of poverty and working long hours, while he himself resided in luxury in a mansion called Diamond House and the $1,000 bills in his vaults piled up into millions. Here he picked the prettiest of his subjects' daughters and ordered them sent to his palace, adding them to a collection matching that of any Arabian chieftain. Here he threatened instant death and eternal damnation for any who doubted or questioned or disobeyed him in the slightest. Still, you might well remember King Ben more vividly from an earlier time, when you were too young to know the meaning of words like heresiarch, or debauchery, or despotism. When a trip to Benton Harbor was something like a trip to Disneyland today, All of the streetcar conductors had long hair and beards, and the older ones looked like Santa Claus. Down by the lake there was a fabulous amusement park where other bearded men ran a concession and rides, the roller coaster and the miniature railroad. If you were lucky enough to be there on the right day, you could go to the ballpark and watch a team of still other bearded men play in a visiting team. It was a fantastic sight. 3-foot-long manes of hair flying out behind them as they ran bases or chased flies and grounders. And they always won, usually by lopsided scores. There might even be a street parade. A bearded brass band would play, the ball team would march proudly behind them, and the monarch who ruled over this wonderland might put in appearance himself. He never wore a crown, not in public anyway, but otherwise he lived up to all your expectations. Every stitch of his clothing was pure white. Beneath his fine white hat, a great mass of copper-colored curls fell down to drape over his shoulders, and his beard nearly hid his white tie. A massive gold locket hung from his neck, and if his white coat was unbuttoned, a heavy gold watch chain could be seen slung across his white vest. From a distance, he looked something like the classic paintings of some ancient prophet. But if you could get close, you realized that there was something very strange about his eyes. No matter how serious or stern he kept the rest of his face, they always seemed to be smiling, just as though, deep inside, he was constantly laughing at the whole world and everything in it. In fact, the Supreme Court of Michigan ruled in 1929 that although Ben Purnell's guilt had been incontrovertibly proven, the colony could very probably exist without him and not constitute in any way a menace to public morals. Furthermore, neither the state of Michigan nor the city of Benton Harbor have had cause to regret this decision.